Ladies and gentlemen, would like to call our special meeting, February 5th, 2018 to order. This is our Community and Neighborhood Enhancement Advisory Board. I'd like to welcome everyone being here. The first item of business is to approve the minutes from our January 25th, 2018 meeting. Can I have a motion for that, please?
Second.
It's been moved by Steve Dixon and, seconded by Thompson. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Would this be a good time to talk about, when we vote, if it passes by a majority of ayes, like just happened, that's fine. If there is a nay vote, then we need to do a roll call vote. Could you explain how we do that?
Yes, if anyone votes no on something, I will call a roll call just with your last name, and you will say yay or nay, just for the record, because this meeting is now being televised, so you are on Channel 20. So just for transparency, whenever you do a voice vote, it really isn't clear as to who's voting no. So we'll just go through that when that happens. And you do have the ability to abstain from a vote if you want to. So you would just say after the motion that you abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, items of discussion action. Number A is proposed process to develop implementation plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I think we're going to start again kind of where we began last month with some of the introductions. And so I think what you're going to find this morning is both Aubrey and I will be able to get up and we're going to walk through a few things. Giving you some additional information, some of the things that you had asked for last month, and to also start stepping through that process with the first one being, what is an implementation plan? When we talk about the sales tax program and we talk about how we accomplish that, one of the things that we're going to strive to work towards is completing a plan that you can recommend to the council for approval. And when we look at a plan, we're talking about a plan that helps us guide the projects themselves. And so this is going to be a plan that not just identifies the projects, but includes their budgets and their scopes and a potential timeline. And this is very similarly done on like our MAPS 3 program, but also in our bond programs as well. So it allows us to at least have you make sure that all the information that you agree to as a board, the information that's approved by the council is being executed by staff per that plan. Now, it's going to take several meetings, we believe, to get this accomplished. And one of the things that I'll mention in the plan and something that we're going to concentrate on this morning is this very first top box, begin the development of the prioritization criteria. You might recall from last month, we talked about the large number of projects that we just have that are out there. We also possibly have some new projects as well. But it's going to be a task to sort through those projects and for the sales tax program, actually having projects approved for the tax. Now, there's other programs and things that the city may be looking at in the future, but our goal is to make sure that the sales taxes and the monies that are collected as a part of that tax are included in the sales tax plan. So the overall plan development will be, is we're going to work on prioritization first, and we have 2 of those that we're going to actually work on this morning with you. It's probably more of a conversation than anything else. We don't really have a specific action item for you, but we are looking for a dialogue and we're looking for discussion and just additional input as we prepare some action items for your meeting next month. So what you see is kind of a 3-step process. Once we have a prioritized criteria for projects, we're then able to then look at a project list. We can sort that list that's very specific to the sales tax, and then we can actually do that actual adoption of the plan. So that's really what we're going to be stepping through this meeting and also probably the next and third meetings of this year. The plan's actually going to be a document. It'll actually be a book. It's probably going to be in a 3-ring binder. It's something that we'll also make available in a PDF form. This is one of the proposed covers that we might present to you, but it is not the final by any means. But as I mentioned, it organizes the projects. It has the budgets, the scopes, and the schedules for the projects as well. And again, it's that guide that we can also use to periodically update one of the things we believe in this plan that might be helpful for this board is to not look at the whole program at once. You might recall from the last meeting, we have 27 months of sales tax collections, nearly 3 years, of implementation of projects. One of the things we don't know is if we're going to have some new projects, say, later this year, possibly next year, maybe in year 2. So what we're going to be working towards is maybe a shorter goal or a shorter range of projects to approve, maybe 6 months worth, and then in 6 months possibly amending that plan with additional projects. So this is going to be a document that you're going to be able to actually physically hold and review and look at when we get to the end of this process. So I'm going to start right into, if there's not any questions about the implementation plan and kind of our goals so far. We're good? Okay. So let's talk about prioritization. The reason that prioritization is so important, and one of the things that I think I probably mentioned before, is that we have a very large list of projects for consideration. And the number of projects is going to exceed the funding capacity for the sales tax. There are always more needs than we simply can fund in any one program. And when we talked about the 2017 bond issue, it got us down the list of needed projects, but it by far completed that. This sales tax is going to help us get a lot further down, even further, with your guidance. But as we look, there's a lot of things that go into prioritization. And this applies to all 5 categories of work. So when we talk about resurfacing, or we talk about street enhancements or trails, sidewalks, and bike lanes, it's not just a matter of one criteria. And so what you're going to see is there's a lot of data. We have Plan OKC that is a primary guide, and then there's also public input as well. I'm going to go ahead and make a handout. This was something that you asked for last month, and we went ahead and created what we call the unfunded project list. And again, knowing that it's very small on screen, you're going to actually get a handout of this morning. And this is just the unfunded projects as of February for resurfacing. One is the residential list, and one is the arterial list. And I think what you're going to find on this is that it's just a number of projects, and one of the things that staff has done as these come in is we start working on cost estimating those projects, because that's also a factor. I mean, as we collect funds for the sales tax, we're only going to make it so far down a list. But these are what these lists look like, and I would tell you that we print these lists regularly. This updates almost weekly. We get requests either from citizens, hey, I would like my residential street resurfaced, or we may get some guidance from council. We also think that we're going to receive some guidance from you if there's some projects that you would like to look at or add to this list. Now, a lot of these projects came onto the list through the bond program last year. When we actually held those workshops and we went out into the community in each of the wards, there was an opportunity for comment cards to be submitted that added a tremendous number of projects to this list. So this list grew dramatically from a much shorter list to a much longer list last year. I don't know if that's a process that this board would recommend or not, but I mean, if there is the need for additional input, we can do that. And I just share that this list changes. So if we were to print this list again next month, it probably would have more projects on it than it does today. But I just kind of wanted you to be able to see what that looked like and what staff uses as a tool, so that when we're taking those phone calls, when we're getting that input from council, that we're tracking this and that it's a list that's repeatable and recordable. Okay? So, as we move into prioritization, and so I open this up for discussion as you kind of think through the process. How do we add projects to the list? If there's some ideas that the board has that they would like staff to consider and follow and look into, that might be a topic of conversation today for us to receive some additional input from you in addition to maybe what I just mentioned. The second thing that we're looking for input is Aubrey and I are going to work a little bit, probably more through the morning. First, we're going to cover street resurfacing. And then we're also going to cover street enhancements. Now, these are just 2 of the 5 project categories that are part of the sales tax. The other 3 are going to come later meetings. These are the 2 that we'd like to really have us focus on this morning. But I'm going to go ahead and show to you on the street resurfacing, these are the criteria that we're currently using to try to sort this list. Pavement condition index, work orders, repair costs, average daily trips or traffic, which is the traffic counts, maintenance history, and also accident severity. We're also going to go through street enhancements, which you're going to see has to do with responsive populations, connectivity, network impacts, and neighborhood and commercial revitalization. So here those are again. And what I'm going to show you is the kind of data. I know this was a question last month, or at least at our last meeting. When I say last month, just a couple of weeks ago. It sounds like it was forever, right? No. But I'm actually going to walk through these and show you what that data looks like for you to gauge and decide if that's an important criteria for prioritization for the sales tax. And maybe it's less important. One of the things that we'll get to is we have the ability to weight these criteria too. They don't all have to be equally weighted. So if something is more important, perhaps the quality of the pavement is more important than the average daily traffic, we have the ability with our systems to weight those so that we can sort this list based on your recommendations. So PCI, you're going to hear this quite a bit. PCI, Pavement Condition Index. It's actually a measure. It's something that we actually are able to record on every street in Oklahoma City. It's on a scale of 0 to 100, and as I mentioned at our last meeting, 0 being basically a dirt or a non-existent street, and a 100 being a brand new, recently either constructed or resurfaced street. And right now in Oklahoma City, if we average all of the streets together, the average is a 66. So you might ask, is that good or is that bad? What I would tell you is that streets that we find that are arterial, that are 70 and better, are considered in pretty good and better than average condition. So 70 and better is good to very good. When we get streets that are in that 40 to 70 range, they're really in that maintenance criteria. They really need a resurfaced street to complete them. Anything less than a 40, we're talking about a street that has to be totally reconstructed. We've lost the ability to resurface a street at that point. The reason I mention that is that it doesn't mean that street shouldn't be reconstructed. It just means it's a lot more expensive. So when we look at resurfaced streets, they're much cheaper than if we let them get below that 40 mark. And again, streets over a 70, we're fairly confident with. So as a part of an internal goal that we have when we talk about pavement condition indexes for the city of Oklahoma City, we're striving to get our average above a 70. If we can have an average of streets that's above a 70, we feel that we're going to make a really big mark on improvement. And we believe that the bond and the sales tax programs have the ability to do that for street resurfacing. This map's really small, and there's really not a way for me to show this any better other than we do track every street in Oklahoma City that's public, every residential street, every arterial street, and this is what we frequently show as our pavement condition index map. The streets that are in red are those that are probably most in the below 40 range. Those that you see in the shades of purple and blue are generally in that 40 to 70 range, and if you see those green streets, those are those ones that are generally 70 and better. So we monitor those very closely, and we actually have the ability, if we wanted to zoom in on any one of those streets in our information system, we can actually tell you the specific PCI number for each of those street segments. So if you wanted to know what the PCI was on Southwest 44th from Penn to Western, I could give you that number. And so that is actually a piece of this data that can go into the sorting for the prioritization, and that's exactly what happens on these streets. So any questions on PCI? It is one of the leading indicators for street condition. We do update this data now every year. This previous picture, whoops, went the wrong way. This is a vehicle that is actually a city vehicle that our field service inspectors drive. What you see on the front of this vehicle is called a profiler. It has the ability, as they drive every street in the city, it collects roughness data. It collects the roughness of the street, and we're able to convert that data into a PCI number. So if you see this vehicle on city streets, it's actually collecting that data real time. Previously, before we acquired this truck and the data collector that you see here, our updates were done about every other year. Some were even older than that. We even had some of our updates that were done on a visual observation, but everything now is completely collected by instrumentation, so we've got the ability to make sure that we're getting the similar numbers for the entire city and that there's not a lot of room for error. Another criteria that we look at is work order history. There's a lot more red dots in certain areas of the city than others, but these are some of the work orders that we've had in just the past year for Oklahoma City, and these can be everything from potholes to base repairs. Now, the difference between a pothole and a base repair is more than just a hole. Sometimes we find that a section of roadway, but not the entire roadway, has failed, and we'll actually cut out a complete section. So if you hear the terminology base repair, we're cutting a section of street out and completely rebuilding just that piece. And that happens in residential and arterial. Sometimes it follows maybe a utility break or something like that, but these are all those different work orders, over the past year, and you'll see that they're generally more dense. where you see the density, those are generally the higher traffic areas. It's just where the roads are getting a lot more use. But you'll see that we do maintenance all over the city. So it's not uncommon to have a street, say in far northeast or southeast or southwest Oklahoma City, that has a really low PCI number that could score quite high on a list depending on the number of work orders that we've had there. But again, we're looking for weights and measures. This is an actual screen print of our work order system. I just mentioned this because it's completely electronic. We use a software called CityWorks, and it's what generates the work orders for our city crews every morning. And so they'll take a number of these work orders out that's on a given day for what they feel can be produced in about an 8-hour work shift. The contractors or our city employees will go out and fix these, and then they report back into the system as completed. But the mapping and the technology is that we can simply issue work orders, and those are done. Our response time for a pothole is 3 days. So granted, sometimes it's raining more than others, but right now we're about 80% of the time we're repairing potholes 3 days or less. Question? Yes.
How are these work orders generated? Are they called in from the public or from your PCI surveys? Or
So most of them coming from the public. We actually have our Action Center line, which is 297-2535. When they call those in, those are recorded into the city system and immediately forwarded to the Public Works Streets Department, and a work order is created automatically. There's a new part of the city's delivery where we have smartphone application, okc.gov. You can also turn them in through your smartphone. What's unique about the smartphone is that it's GIS located. So if you are at that pothole, when you make that report, it tells us exactly where that pothole is instead of waiting on a description from, say, a caller. So we get them mostly from the public, either through the Action Center or through the smartphone apps.
and then they're reviewed by your department or checked against your PCI list, or?
Potholes are automatically, without checking, we go out and immediately repair those as a street hazard. I will say sometimes we find that the location's not accurate, but rarely do we not find something that needs maintenance when that work order is placed. But there's been a few where maybe the accuracy wasn't good enough for us to locate the pothole was reported. I would say that's far fewer than the majority that we do. We average 80,000 potholes a year in repair. Pretty large number. On wet years, it's more. On drier years, it's a little bit less. Yes?
When we have a citizen that contacts us, say, by email, we're copied. I think you were copied on one that I was a part of. What's the procedure for us to be able to handle that and to address that?
So if you personally receive an email, what I would encourage you to do is to forward those. If you receive those emails, send those to me. I'll make sure, me or Aubrey, we will make sure that those get entered into the city system. Obviously, we do get a lot of those. That's how we receive them, also from council. So frequently, council may be at a neighborhood meeting. They may have gotten something on their phone. We'll get an email in the morning sometimes that says, hey, I had a few of these reported, and we'll just simply get those entered into the system. So feel free to just call Aubrey or I direct, or get those in email, and we'll get those addressed. Okay? Yes?
I had a question, actually 3 questions. What is the percentage of non-city contractors that do this work? You mentioned city workers or contractors that do repair.
On potholes, it's 100% city crews. On base repairs, we are actually making a change this year, so let me explain. Previously, we had contractors that were doing base repairs following utility breaks. So if you had a water line or a sewer line have maintenance, we had previously had contractors servicing those. This year in 2018, we're actually moving those over to city crews. One of the reasons is our utilities department also uses the CityWorks work order system. What we think we're going to have an advantage is to being able to do some of those repairs a little quicker because it's already in the city system when it goes in as a water line break. When we know that that break is complete, we can transfer internally in that system to the streets department to then immediately do the street repair. But there are a number of larger base repairs that are not best suited for city crews. And those will be contracted. I don't have the percentage. We can look that up, but it's a small percentage compared to the number of potholes.
I had 2 more questions. Since I'm on Classen quite a bit, is that a resurfacing project that's just happened, so that I can understand the difference between a resurfacing and a major project?
Yes, so on Classen in the vicinity of Northwest 18th, that's a resurfacing project. What you can expect, and we have a number of resurfacings. Of course, last meeting, we did approve 16 new projects that will be going out in each of the wards. But what you can expect on Arterial Street, Classen is a little bit different because it's 3 lanes instead of a typical 2-lane. or I should say it's 6 lanes instead of 4, so it's taking a little bit longer. But what you can expect on a 4-lane resurfacing is about a month's worth of work. The process, and if you followed class in a little bit, you'll see a large machine that does a milling operation. They actually grind off the top few inches of asphalt. They'll then spend several days. What we'll find after they take off that top layer of asphalt are the number of repairs under that asphalt that need to be made. We'll find soft spots. We'll find some things that are just in what we call the base materials that need to be upgraded. Contractor will then get those repaired, and then immediately the resurfacing or the laydown operation occurs where they'll place the new asphalt back on top. They actually have to let the asphalt rest a few days to let a lot of the volatile gases leave the material before they paint. But what then follows is the painting. Takes about a month, good weather, to mill, base repair, and repaint a typical mile 4 lanes wide on an arterial street. So they haven't painted Classen yet, and we're going to suffer a little bit because of the cold temperatures today and tomorrow, but it's scheduled for painting very soon to restripe.
My last question was about county commissioners. Do we overlap with that in this process? Just a question. I saw the list and all the addresses, and so that was a question.
So we do. And I would say from the city, we have relationships, some actual contractual and memorandum of understanding relationship with Oklahoma County, Cleveland County, and Canadian County. With those agreements, and when the county has a joint project, we often partner with those counties to do road work. The general agreement with each is that if the city provides the materials, the county provides the labor. So the county has their own equipment and machines to where they can do milling and resurfacing. If the city can give them the materials, it ends up being about a 50-50 cost share. The materials are always about half the cost of a street resurfacing project. So we do enter into those, I would say, somewhere between 6 and 12 a year. It just depends on the county and the county resources that are available. It's possible that some of the projects you might recommend could be county projects. So if we find that we've got a project that's in one of those counties and it's also on their list, we'll approach them and completing that as a joint project. So the estimates that you see in these could be reduced by almost half if it's an agreeable project that the county can do as well.
Thank you.
I had a question about that, actually. So what differentiates what's the city's responsibility versus what would be the county's responsibility when it comes to road repair or maintenance?
The county has several, the county's bigger than the city in a lot of cases. So there are some unincorporated areas of Oklahoma City that the county completely maintains. So that would be kind of the first level. So there are some streets that are definitely the counties and not the cities. But what we do find is that especially in some of the rural areas where the city may, on its prioritization, not have a rural road quite as high up on the city list, but maybe the county has it extremely high on their list, that's when those partnerships start to be developed. So the county's needing to get the work done, and they'll approach the city on a street that's in Oklahoma City, but something the county is also willing to work on. You won't find very often the county in our urban area. So you'll mostly find them in those far reaches of northeast or southeast or possibly southwest or northwest Oklahoma City. And again, we don't do a lot of projects, but we probably do between 6 and 12 a year, all counties combined. Very good questions, though. So we will, with the sales tax funds, even when we identify a project, if we can find project overlap with other funding sources, staff will continue to pursue those, whether it's with county. Sometimes we will get some storm mitigation grant funds. So there are times where we're able to apply to Oklahoma emergency management offices, sometimes to FEMA for dollars. We will match funds anytime we can on projects, not just with the county, but possibly with state or federal resources as well. Okay. So this is the work order system. I think I'm going to move to the next slide. Any other questions on work orders? And again, this is just one of those criteria that we look at in prioritization. If we can fix a street that has a lot of work orders, it will reduce some of the calls that we're getting on those streets, and we feel that the citizen confidence could actually go up if we're addressing those worst streets. This is average daily traffic. This is data that we collect every 1 to 2 years. Sometimes it's more quickly than others. It's also data that's not just solely collected by the City of Oklahoma City. The Association of Central Oklahoma Governments also has contractors that help collect data. We do share the same database. So the information that we find is very similar to PCI's. We'll find that on this map, it's coded where the streets that are identified in red are more heavily traveled than the ones identified in orange. The least traveled are the ones that are in green. And you can see we've put a legend on here. The green ones are less than 5,000 vehicles a day. The ones in red are over 20,000 vehicles a day. But obviously, when we look at streets that have high volume, when we look at streets that have low PCIs, very worst of conditions, we really have been targeting in the past those typical roads for improvement first, so we can get the greatest impact on those that are being the most driven, that are in the worst condition. The ability to zoom in, and this was one I went ahead and zoomed in for you today. We know the exact counts of any street in the city, and this is also available on ACOG's website. If you were to go online and go to the ACOG website, you too can just zoom in because it's a shared database and find some of the same information. So when we're looking at prioritization and sorting, these numbers would go into that model for each street. And again, it's just a matter of weighting. How much weight do we want to give traffic volume versus PCI versus work orders versus overall repair cost? Accident severity is another criteria that just in the last year, one of the things that Aubrey and I had presented as a part of the bond issue, I would tell you in previous years, a lot of the project management was done either on a steno pad or on a spreadsheet. I mean, we were very limited with our capabilities of what we could do for data collection and management. But with GIS systems and the ability to have layers, with the ability to store all of this data, we're able to look at all those things equal, and it's very less of a manual process and a very computerized and automatic process. Accident severity is one of those things that we can actually use ODOT data and pull that in and look at. And so we can actually create mapping that looks like these. These are heat maps. This is of Northwest Expressway, one of our busiest streets in Oklahoma City. And we'll typically find that there are traditionally accidents at the intersections. But we can also zoom in a little bit further, and we'll find that each one of these boxes is an accident report that was filed. This is that same stretch, but we can actually find out if those accidents are avoidable, not avoidable, those types of things. But we, again, can use this data for prioritization. So we have been doing that for the past year, and this is one of the things that was used on the bond program. So we're still on street resurfacing. I'm going to have one more handout because I know that these are really small, and these are draft, and the draft is really big on these. These are from the bond program generally, and not intended for you to just automatically receive without having some review, and we would like to receive some recommendations from you on the sales tax. But this is what that looks like when you take all those different criteria, whether it's PCI, whether it's traffic volume, which is the ADT, whether it's the maintenance history, the accident severity, and you can see some of the weights at the bottom of these pages that are just, again, starting points. But we put, for example, on the arterial street resurfacing, a pretty high weight for PCI. We put 40%. For ADT, we put 25%. For maintenance history, 25%. And for accident severity, 10%. These are absolutely modified. We can modify these. We can scale these and make these specific to the sales tax projects based on your recommendations. The sheet that is the second one is the residential. They're a little bit different. Just from the scoring perspective, we still look at pavement condition and maintenance history. There's not going to be as many accident-type items that are in a residential street. Doesn't mean there's not any, but there's just far fewer accidents in our residential streets than on our arterials. So we see that the scoring is a little bit different. You'll see that we just have used equal weights for 4 criteria in that category. In this one, we actually tie it to Plan OKC. You're going to see that we actually had current population, employment, and visitation, which is one of the criteria, again, tying in the city's comprehensive plan to some of the measures that are here. So the only reason I hand these out is so that you can see them in more detail. This is a sheet that would end up in that implementation plan. This is a sheet that, once recommended by this board, we would include for approval, and this would be our guidance on actually sorting projects in the future. So, any questions, kind of where we're at? And again, it's not intended to make decisions, but definitely we want to facilitate discussion today. Anything that you might have. I mean, we're all ears, and as we kind of go through the process in the next month or two, our goal is to get to a completed implementation plan that allows us to then select new projects to bring to you as a board to recommend approval to the council. But this is the criteria that was used for the 16 that you recommended last meeting. So you'll see that there was quite a process using the GIS and alignment with comp plan and the weighting that was used for the bond projects. Are we good for now? Yeah.
Talk about, can you talk about monies are going to be coming from the sales tax that we're involved with, as well as the general obligation bond?
Absolutely.
And that last time we selected 16 projects, 16 streets to be resurfaced. How does all that work together with the GO bond?
Absolutely. So I should have brought the pie chart again that we had in the previous month's PowerPoint. One of the things on the sales tax that you'll find is from a council direction, about 70% of the sales tax, 240 million total sales tax, 70% of that is earmarked for resurfacing. Now, the 30% is in street enhancements and the sidewalks and the trails and such. So as we work forward as to how to fully expend that 70% portion, and it's not a percentage, I should say it's 168 million. It's approximately 70%. It's 168 million in resurfacing for the sales tax. We did recommend approval of about 19 million of that. The projects that were recommended last month were those top ranked projects that are currently in the bond issue. And we actually just went and we sorted it so that there were 2 in each ward. Now, that's not criteria moving forward, but we wanted to make sure that, at least for that first meeting, we did something that was equivalent for all wards. And they weren't new projects. They are in the bond program now. Now, here's the thing. The bond program is a 10-year program. It has about 50% of its work is in streets. It's going to take 10 years to complete, and the first sale is not until this April, May. So the very earliest of projects that could occur in the 2017 bond issue would be as early as possibly this summer. And that's assuming that there's even street projects that are in this first sale. The reason that I say maybe is because we're still finishing the 07 bond issue. So there is a commitment to finish the 07 before starting the 17. So the reality is this sales tax helps us actually complete some projects possibly sooner than later. So when we came with a recommendation last month, the idea was instead of it having some of those top-rated street projects wait a year or more to actually be funded and authorized to bring them to you as a board, knowing that sales taxes, we expect that first check in just the next couple of weeks. We have the ability to actually affect work this spring on some of the city's top street projects. So we do believe there's probably an opportunity with the sales tax to look at some of those other critical projects based on recommendations from the board. But again, it could be a completely new list based on the draft I handed out today, possibly new projects that come into that list, possibly a resort, reprioritization, all those things. But the sales tax is probably going to help us get a lot more street projects done quicker than the bond could. That's probably the biggest difference. And the bond would sell a little bit of money each year for streets, but realize the bond also is selling money for libraries, trails, parks, police, fire, a lot of other categories as well. So there's a balance that has to occur in the bond issue, whereas the sales tax is geared strictly towards the projects we've discussed here. Hope that helps a little bit.
Can you, while we were kind of broaching that subject, can you kind of speak a little bit more to, I guess, how things would look on the back end, if you will, if we prioritize some of these projects that are in the bond or would have maybe eventually been handled? What will that look like kind of on the back end as far as other projects being able to be maybe included or tackled by the bond?
Sure. So let me clarify too. The list I handed out today does not include any of the additional bond projects that are in the bond issue. This is the list of the unfunded projects. So if there is a desire to look at the bond list, I can bring that to you, or I can get that to you if you'd like to look at those. So what this looks like, with 19 million of listed bond projects, if the council approves the recommendation from the board, that money in the bond, because it's listed for street resurfacing, has to be used on street resurfacing. It can't move to another category of work. So what will happen with the bond, and there's also a bond advisory committee that oversees those dollars, they, at some point in the future, would have $19 million that, again, could apply to street resurfacing, and they're looking at similar lists as you are. So I suspect they will, at the time that those monies are available, relook at the top street projects on that list and authorize those monies to go towards those streets at that time. We simply have the opportunity to affect some of those projects sooner, but even if you replace some bond projects with a sales tax, the money has to stay with streets. So it's automatically going to go into streets for Oklahoma City for improvement. Okay. It's a good question, too. So you may find in the prioritization, and that's something that we couldn't conceive, you may find that you may ask staff for the bond list to look at some other critical streets, or you may ask us, hey, why don't we go ahead and put the bond projects in here and re-rank these and see how this looks today, right? So if we could get that kind of guidance, if you want to look at all streets in the city and you really want to look at worst streets based on criteria that you're selecting and the weights that you'd like to look at them, we can print those lists. But the list I gave you today does not currently include the bond projects. And that would be the guidance we'd like to receive in the next month or so. So as you think through that, we'd like to bring to you maybe a 6-month list of projects in street resurfacing. And we're going to work through each of the categories. We're just talking about street resurfacing. Aubrey's getting ready to talk about street enhancements, which is category number 2. But at least give us so that as we start to collect the sales taxes, and again, we think that they'll average about $10 million a month. So the list that was recommended last meeting is probably going to take 2 or 3 of the collections. So 2 to 3 months. We'd like to be in a position in 2 to 3 months to have that next list. So when that next collection comes in, we're still continuing with projects so that there's no gap in the project delivery.
Would get a list of the 19 million that we had selected last time from you, and then the GO bond priorities.
I'd be happy to do
as
that.
well.
I would be happy to do that. Would the board like to see one comprehensive list of all those projects with the bond and the other unfunded together, or separate?
I think separate would be better, but I would like to see both the lists.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have the ability to print these anyway, so I don't want it to appear as though there's work on staff's part. It's just a matter of us hitting that query on the list and printing it for you. And I think there may be some opportunities that we'll work through the clerk's office. Maybe we can distribute those even before the next meeting in a way that you're not waiting a month to get the list. We'll try to get those out early. Okay.
Eric, would those include on those lists the PCIs and the ADTs?
I can show any and all that information that you want. Would you like to see the criteria today that shows up on that list? We simply turn on columns is what that looks like.
Yes, sir.
I'd be happy to do that. Now realize that we aren't going to send the list to you sorted. It will not be sorted based on criteria, but we'll just list the projects with the additional data. Until you're comfortable and ready to make that sort, we're going to hold back from passing it through the sorting filter until we get some confirmation, I think, or some conversation. If the list looks good, that's great. But, we just definitely want to have your input before we proceed on that. Okay? We will prepare those lists, Mr. Chairman. We'll get those to you here as quick as we can, maybe within the week.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on street resurfacing? Okay. And you'll get 2 lists, residential and arterial. I don't want it to be confusing, but we'll make sure we label the top of those lists very differently. And something else that you might think about that isn't in the current prioritization, how you'd like to treat 2 different lists. The council, when it approved funding, approved it just as resurfacing. There wasn't guidance given on residential versus arterial. So I don't know if that's something you want to wait, or if you want to combine the lists and look at it as a combined score, but that's just a little bit more information for consideration. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. Aubrey McDermott again with the Planning Department. I know that's a lot of information for you all to try to absorb, and street resurfacings are the easy ones. So I'm getting ready to talk about street enhancements. And one of the reasons we wanted to bring this category forward to you in the very beginning is because street enhancements are a little bit more complicated and will take longer to figure out how to appropriate resources based on the needs of the corridor and all the elements and amenities that would go into those streets. They'll take a little bit longer to design. They may involve some input from commercial districts or business improvement districts or neighborhoods. So we wanted to get this thinking started early so that we could get a list of projects going. The other thing with street enhancements is I believe it's a $12 million allocation. Is that right, Eric? For street enhancements. And $12 million won't go that far if you do a full-blown street enhancement project like some of the really high-volume, intense streets that we see in our downtown area. Or it could be stretched out and go a lot farther if you do basic types of street enhancements. So we're going to start this conversation, which isn't quite as clear-cut in terms of the data and the methodology that went behind the street resurfacings. But I also wanted to share with you all of the scope and cost of these street enhancements really needs to be thought through because there are so many different levels of street enhancements. When we talk about a streetscape, I think that people visualize a street that's going to have street trees and street furniture and maybe some on-street parking, enhanced crosswalks. Well, this pot of money can be used for all of those things, but also partial things. So we do have funds in the GO bond and the sales tax for just basic resurfacing and restriping, and that can go a long way towards making a street a safer, smoother, better street. In addition to that, though, we could see some streets that maybe are called for bicycle or pedestrian facilities that could be a part of the resurfacing project, but it adds another enhancement to that street that wouldn't have been done otherwise. Other types of things like traffic calming, you'll hear traffic calming is a term for a street enhancement project where we might see some of the data that comes into it, like those accident collisions or pedestrian conflicts or fatalities that we could look at. Those types of things really matter to a successful streetscape, and in areas of the city that are starting to see higher volumes of people needing to cross a street, we're starting to see some safety considerations, and maybe traffic is moving faster than we would like them to. And through certain types of changes to that street, you could really calm the traffic down and make a street more highly visible to cars to help with the conflict with pedestrians. So, of course, trees and landscaping, plant material, irrigation systems take a street enhancement project and elevate it, makes it a lot more attractive and beautiful and walkable. However, these types of things require ongoing maintenance. So not all street enhancement projects can really afford to put a lot of landscaping in. So what we're recommending is, having worked with a lot of groups and districts that have formed business improvement districts, it works really well when the city partners with these districts to enter into an agreement and take the maintenance requirements and the irrigation requirements on. So if the city's going to invest the capital to do the streetscape, we'd like for a partnering agreement for the community to also help support it. Other amenities like benches and bike racks and gateway signage are very customizable. A lot of times a district might have a theme or certain materials that they'd like to use. So these are those elements that the city can invest the capital to build them, but then those districts who would maintain them and empty the trash cans and replace benches and help keep things painted and fresh, we would need to enter into an agreement. So a lot more complicated type of a system that we're talking about, making these improvements to our city that requires that type of public-private partnership in many cases. So I just wanted to show this because as we start to identify needs for streetscape improvements, we need to be thinking about what that street and what that corridor and what those land uses on the street might need. Okay. This is just an example of one of those high-level streetscapes, and when we talk about all the amenities, you could probably pick out examples of this one street having all of them, which I don't expect that we'll be able to afford to implement streets like this on every street in Oklahoma City, but that doesn't mean that every street in Oklahoma City can't be a safe and walkable street. So this is a refresh from a slide that you saw in our first meeting where we walked you through the process for the GO bond. And again, we're using the GO bond as a starting point for our discussion about prioritization because we've already developed a methodology using as many good data sources and inputs as we can. So with streetscapes and street enhancements, there's a little bit less of that. It's a more subjective thing because a street enhancement project is going to be doing things for that corridor, like helping spur economic development, helping with beautification and community appearance. Those are more subjective types of things, and they're needed in many areas across Oklahoma City. So we do have to be thinking about the guiding plans, the work we've been doing with the community, and that's where our comprehensive plan, some of our area planning plans and our commercial districts that we're starting to invest in come into play. So what we've done is we've taken all of the public input from the GO bond process. We have mapped those. We've added to them as we've gotten other people coming in. Even since the GO bond was voted for, we have new streetscape projects and street enhancements requested by the community. And we're applying all of these ranking criteria to them and sorting them. So I will share with you what some of those are. The comprehensive plan itself, the citywide comprehensive plan, has maps in there that designate commercial corridors and nodes of concentration of specific uses, trying to get transit-oriented development to happen around those nodes. A lot of times those places in Oklahoma City that are really evolving and strengthening their commercial presence or their interaction between people and transit don't have the types of infrastructure that make it as easy for them to use for those things. That's where this sales tax program comes into play. Excuse me. So the comprehensive plan has a lot of good base data, driving land uses, driving investments in Oklahoma City that need to be paired with the city's resources to help the infrastructure catch up to speed with the economy and with private investment. Next is the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan, which will be coming forward to Planning Commission and City Council this month and next month. This Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan we will bring back and give you a full presentation on it and the background and the inputs that went into it. And last month, you all asked us about all the work that the MAPS 3 Trails and Sidewalks Subcommittee has done to determine where sidewalks and trails would be best placed in Oklahoma City. That plan and the thinking and the process of prioritization for those investments was also rolled into this plan. We've also rolled in the 1997 Trails Master Plan. So a lot of the criteria and thoughts over the years are now reflected in this one document, so you don't have 4 separate documents to try to compare. We'll walk you through that. It identifies linkages to the trail system, sidewalks by prioritization areas, and bicycle infrastructure. We've also been working with the community in special areas in the city where we've identified needs that were able to be placed on the bond list for funding. It doesn't mean that the bond list, the funding available through the bond would be the full extent of the streetscape enhancements those districts are trying to get accomplished. So, for example, West 10th and the Windsor areas were 2 places where the community and the planning department came together with some strategies to help those districts become places that people could recognize through either signage, gateway markers, landscaping. So those are the types of districts that we really feel like the city's already done a lot of work in the community, that we could take that to the next step with the source of funds that's available. A program that the planning department supports, and Kim Cooperhart is here, who runs this program in the planning department, also helps districts get organized to form business improvement districts. These are districts that are very well poised to receive streetscape enhancements that also have that ability of the community investing in themselves to take a streetscape project to that next level, where they can take on some maintenance responsibility and take care of some landscaping. So we feel like these are very good candidates for consideration. In addition to that, we mentioned the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative program, which is also a program in the planning department that has 2 new neighborhoods that have been designated to receive federal funds and staff support. These neighborhoods, one of them overlaps with one of our commercial district revitalization areas in the Capitol Hill area. So not only do we have a focus on the commercial corridor, but we also have the support of enhancing what's happening in the neighborhoods around it so that the people who live next to that corridor can easily walk to, ride their bikes to, and park in the commercial districts that are adjacent to them. So again, we're looking at planning areas of the city where we can start to see synergies coming together with investment between the city and our community. And so these are some of those intangible types of things that I mentioned aren't really as easy to weigh in terms of a data point on a map, but they should be considered as we start to look at areas where we can invest. So these are the GeoBond prioritization criteria that we used, and I will walk you through each one of these. And the first one was responsive populations. And what this means is we wanted to prioritize areas that we can invest that are going to support the people who need those types of improvements the most. So for responsive populations for street enhancements, we're looking at what the street enhancement would provide to the community. This would be benefits like making the street easier to navigate, walk to, get to transit stops, making it safer for pedestrians in highly trafficked areas. So the people who need access to transit the most, children, elderly, lower income populations that may depend on the transit system, these are the darker spots on this map are showing where those populations exist. And like you saw before on some of the maps, these are just kind of a layer of information that you can layer on top of other information to really start to see some hot spots on the map pop up. The other slide is just the types of the number of people that are impacted by the use of that corridor. So this has a lot to do with trips and where traffic is moving in Oklahoma City, and destinations where people are traveling from their home to their place of employment or to their school. So we're looking at the heaviest use corridors by all the different types of transportation, not just vehicular, but where people are traveling to get to their bus stop or where they would need to go if they were walking or riding a bike. And it takes into account our current population and it projects future growth. Because as our city grows and traffic changes where it needs to go, we need to be able to anticipate where we can make our investments to handle that increase in capacity, that increase in demand for our road and our infrastructure to meet that. The other area is any way that we can impact revitalization. One of the comprehensive plan's main goals, thank you, Jeff, is that we can impact areas of the city that are starting to decline as other areas of our city are starting to build out. There's a balance that cities have to make with where they invest and how the community spends sales tax dollars. And certain parts of our city, as we know, are older. The infrastructure might need improvement. If we have the ability to help revitalize those areas that might be older and declining, we can help spur reinvestment. And we've seen this story come to fruition in Oklahoma City, and we have plenty of places that are ready and poised to get the same type of help. So the citywide comprehensive plan, again, directs that. We have urban commercial districts and transit-oriented districts already identified in the plan. The neighborhood revitalization strategic area is a core area in Oklahoma City that does receive some federal funds and resources towards neighborhood revitalization. We've laid this over on the map, so it's kind of hard to see the dark green and light green, but the dark green are these areas that we're trying to highlight. Our area planning areas, as I mentioned, and all of our commercial district revitalization programs, the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative programs, and any place that has an organized business improvement district. So again, this layer is put on top of all those other layers, and we start to see them come together to really identify specific corridors that we should look closer at. And another big piece of this is that we have all of these streets and sidewalk networks and bicycle facilities and trails that we need to make sure connect to each other so that they can receive their maximum intended use. So we're looking at opportunities to connect people to the primary places that they need to go. So this map takes into account where you can connect populations to schools, parks, bus stops, and make sure that the existing sidewalk network is navigable. You don't have any breaks in the sidewalk network, and that through a streetscape enhancement, we can actually make sure that people aren't having to go farther out of their way, which detracts from them being able to walk if they have a clear, easy path that they could travel to a destination. A lot of these different connectivity points were identified in the bicycle pedestrian master plan, which is coming forward, which I think will be incredibly helpful to you in identifying some of those priority areas. Since the GO bond, I mentioned we've had several streetscape enhancement candidates come forward, which we've been keeping in lists for our consideration for sales tax funding. We've also been thinking about some enhanced criteria to use in addition to the criteria we used for the GO bond. So we mentioned safety before. Putting together some real quantifiable, tangible data points on safety is not difficult to do. And if safety becomes a reason that might take one streetscape project a notch above another in terms of prioritization, we could certainly look at the number of people who are now trying to travel or the need to be able to go back and forth across the street where those connections aren't very good to try to enhance how people shop. Access points, access management has become difficult because of so many drives or curb cuts along a corridor. We could start looking at ways to reduce that or combine drives. There are a lot of different things you can include in a streetscape enhancement project. So safety and access might be one of those important factors we really want to drill down into more. Also, just the economic development and revitalization potential of that corridor. Again, this is a little bit more subjective, but there may be key gateway corridors into Oklahoma City where we see people coming from outside areas. There might be a regional gateway to an important destination that we feel like is really important for our community appearance of people's perceptions of Oklahoma City that might take an enhanced level of streetscape treatment. And then the ability for us to leverage partnerships. We have a lot of our districts that we've been working within that the community is ready to invest. And with the city's dollars and the private investment, we could take that streetscape enhancement and really take it to another level. So opportunities to leverage that public-private partnership might be an important component for us. And with this, I know this is a lot for you to think about today. And like we said, we're not asking you to make a list or vote on anything, but just to give us some direction on what you think would be key prioritization criteria that we could take back and run our list through the criteria methodology and see what pops up to the top of these lists. And at that point, we can adjust the criteria. We can discuss how the criteria ended up looking in the form of a list and what projects might come to the top. So with your direction given to us today about these things, we'd like to know which things you think are important for us to maintain or add to. And then next month, when we come back, we can get a little bit more definitive with what those lists look like. And as Eric mentioned, he'll bring you the data of the streetscape or the street resurfacing list. We'll do the same thing for our street enhancement lists as well. So you'll have a full set of the GO bond, plus these additional street enhancement projects that we've been collecting since the bond was passed. So here is our time to open it up for discussion, questions, and follow-up.
Aubrey, one of the things I know that we will need is a updated map that would show the sidewalks that have been constructed and any of those that are funded to be constructed. And then also the same thing for the bicycle trails in Oklahoma City. Maps. There weren't a whole lot of sidewalks built in Oklahoma City until Maps 3 came along. And originally there was no map to show any of the existing sidewalks, but I know you all have a good working map system that would help us see what has been built, and that's going to help greatly, I think, in the levels of connectivity.
Right.
We've got some. Maps 3 is still finishing the Will Rogers Trail that connects Lake Hefner with the river. That's getting very close to being completed. And then the final Maps 3 trail will be a trail that will go around Draper Lake. And that pretty well completes the original 1997 master plan for trails. So with the $12 million that you talked about initially, that's the funding that we're going to have to do trails and sidewalks and enhancements, correct?
I just got a note here with the numbers. Okay, so streetscapes are actually 24, not 12. Sidewalks are also 24. And trails are 12, and bicycle facilities are 12. So some of our street enhancement areas will be able to provide sidewalks and bicycle facilities as part of that enhancement, but then there's additional allocated funding for just sidewalks and just bicycle facilities. So we do need to look at it holistically. We need to look at where all these improvements are going and where areas of overlap can take place. And I would suggest that on the street enhancements, that we're thinking about the needs of that corridor for the revitalization benefit that they provide. We know that we will want all of those street enhancement projects to include sidewalks and have walkability and pedestrian access as a high priority for the enhancement for that. But in addition, there are going to be plenty of roadways that just get sidewalks along them and the roads are in good condition, or might be a bond project that will get resurfaced. So it is complicated when you think about how you have the allocation of all these different pots of money for these different things, and street enhancements can combine conceivably all of them. And we'll bring you some maps showing the areas of need. Those that are funded, we can generate that list. Those that are funded on the bond and those that have ranked highest priority on the bond, you could see that again, like we did with the street resurfacings. And what we thought would be a good next step, if we want to further this discussion, is in March or April, as soon as that bicycle pedestrian master plan is adopted, to have a really good discussion about how that document works and the things that are proposed within it.
Question, well, actually, a request. I'm more familiar with streetscaping than some. That's so vast and such a difficult area to comprehend overall. It'd be good to have some examples, and maybe this is what we've done here, and this is what's the result, and some of those kinds of things, because it's very much cause and effect. And when I was involved with, the best thing that happened to it was benign neglect. And so I think it would just be good for us to see what that entails. We all know what a sidewalk is, and we understand trails, but streetscapes are all quite different.
Very much. And we've started some data input into the database for the bond projects to come up with the scope, the preliminary scope of what those streetscape enhancement projects would include, because they are all so very different. And why I mentioned the work that we've done with the community and with these commercial districts is because those conversations have been taking place about the needs that exist in those areas. So we're further along to coming up with a solidified program for what the street enhancement would be. And you're right, they are variable, and it is an overwhelming thing to think you can't just take a cost per mile and apply it to all the street segments that you think need enhancement. It's customized. We can bring kind of a menu of options that you can see what these facilities might look like and where these facilities might be important to include based on the traffic counts or the number of businesses or pedestrian counts on that corridor. They're going to take a different level of treatment. And we can provide you some examples of things that have worked and maybe some things that we might do differently.
Thank you.
You mentioned you'll provide the bond list to us, which is great. Is there also a priority how they did their formula to come up with that list?
Right. Our bond list was sorted by the criteria as well. So as Eric mentioned, we can pull out tabs on the side so that you can see their rank and what criteria were scored for those projects. We'd be happy to pull that out too for the streetscape enhancements.
I think that would be very helpful.
Okay. Absolutely.
So just to clarify, would it, or I guess just to maybe ask the question, does it make sense to, or are there any projects that are left? I know that Eric mentioned the 2007 bond projects were wrapping up. I know sidewalks were included in that. And then I know that MAPS 3 also had sidewalk projects taking place. So are there any, I mean, aside from the new bond issue there, are there any other sort of things that we should be looking at where sidewalks or trails or something would be kind of on the table?
That have already been funded through one of those
Well,
sources?
yeah, so I guess what I'm curious about is just, so we've kind of talked about what was in the bond, but just making sure there aren't other sidewalk projects that are forthcoming that we might need to consider as well.
The only other project category I can think of, and it's actually been completed, but council recently authorized what we'll call some general fund revenues for additional sidewalks. Those projects are nearly complete, but there are grant opportunities that come up from time to time that planning works on, and whether it's the strong neighborhood initiatives and things like that. So it's possible we may get something outside and in the future, and we could include that in the mapping system.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, that kind of helps. That's what I was curious about. I felt like there might still be some things that were out there that were going to come, but if we're going to do a map of, just to kind of, or show the updates, just wanting to make sure there's not something to happen.
So I think the request for the combined map that shows, perhaps all the completed projects, we may have some soon-to-be completed projects we could probably put on that same map so you're not getting too many different versions, right? But at least show you all those that are completed and or funded, possibly is a version of a map we could show. Now, one of the things I would note is that if you were curious to see what the sidewalks look like for the 2017 bond, there's actually on the city's website at OKC.gov an interactive map that we encourage a lot of the residents to use too, where you can zoom in on areas and see what those projects are, not just sidewalks, but all the bond projects. A similar resource is available at OKC.gov for the 2007 as well, but they too haven't been combined onto a single map, and it also doesn't show the existing infrastructure that wasn't a project. So I think that's what we can work on together, is to give you a complete map that shows all of the programs and all of the other funds that have been used to date.
Yeah, and specifically, like just contextual, like I know there's been sidewalks come in on a good portion of Martin Luther King, for example, but what I'm not sure about, even when looking at some of the data, it's kind of hard to figure out, well, there's some gaps, and are those gaps because something wasn't funded, because it's expected in 2017, or is that just a gap,
So in the 07, it is complicated because the sidewalks weren't a separate project category. That came to be in 2017, but not in the 07. In the 07, the general condition was if it's a street project, it will get a sidewalk on at least one side of the street. And it wasn't always a new sidewalk. Some of those street projects had existing sidewalks, so not a new sidewalk was provided if it was existing. Now, we did upgrade it for ADA, but we also found ourselves in a few neighborhoods that had street projects, but specifically the neighborhoods, for whatever reasons, have decided they didn't want the sidewalk added. And so we did go through a petition process. So I used the guidance of the map online at OKC.gov on the 07 as a guide, but it's not an assurance that every street project got a sidewalk, but I will tell you most of them did. Yeah. There's a few that did not.
Sandino, in reference to your first question, when the MAPS 3 subcommittee for trails and sidewalks, that was one of the tasks they took on, was to try and see what existing sidewalks were there and then prioritize a map of what sidewalks needed to be built from a priority standpoint. And there's quite a bit of information that would help us, I believe, from that work, because a lot of it there was not enough money to fund all the projects. But they looked at the whole city, high priority on connecting schools to residences. And that's, as far as my belief is, I think more information was done and study was done with that on sidewalks in particular than anything else. And we should certainly, I think, take any information that we can get our hands on to help us know where to go from this point forward.
Yeah, and that's helpful. That's actually very good feedback, because I think anecdotally for me, and I know that there's been a lot of effort to get information to be a lot more comprehensive and a lot more up to date, but I just know when we've had programs, particularly going into the community, into the neighborhoods off the arterials in the past, there's been sort of duplication that wasn't necessarily helpful, in particular with how sidewalks were set up. And so anything we can do to avoid that is very helpful. I think probably MAPS 3 did make some significant progress in that regard, so thanks.
When we do come back and go through the bicycle pedestrian master plan, I think that you will be able to understand how much input has gone into the sidewalk and bicycle portion of that plan. And before, if you want to understand that plan in regard to sidewalk, bicycle, and trail infrastructure before you finalize the streetscape criteria, that's perfectly understandable, because the streetscapes would include those elements potentially. So we certainly can, I think we have a plan to come back. It's either the March or April meeting with a more in-depth dive into that. And we'll be doing the similar types of information for each one of the categories that you have for funding. And I know that they all overlap, but sidewalks and bicycle infrastructure and trail infrastructure, you can't not think about how those play into the street enhancements.
And I think the bike walk plan too, it takes further the MAPS 3, the previous trail plan, the previous bike plan, and combines all that information and also goes forward. So you'll have a consolidated document that takes all the MAPS work, all the previous city and parks work, and gets it into one document for you to review.
The document also records any of the projects that are funded through other sources. As Eric mentioned, we have gotten grants to do certain types of bicycle facilities that are not yet constructed. So that takes it off the table for this group to have to consider funding those projects. So you can see better what's planned, what's funded, what's not funded, and what's considered high priority linkages. And I know you're chomping at the bit to get that information, and we will be bringing that to you shortly, but at least we're getting the conversation started and giving you a lot of food for thought today on what it would take to start to elevate some of our priority areas to the top of our list that we haven't developed yet.
So I think moving forward for both Aubrey and I, what we'd like to have you consider is as we get this additional information out to you, probably through email, through the board secretary through Francis, is to have you start to think through that. And one of the goals we would have for the meeting next month in March would be to hopefully start getting a more refinement of the actual prioritization for the resurfacings, and maybe start that prioritization too for the streetscape, so that maybe in that April timeframe we can look at that next section of projects. Again, the goal being that we don't have a gap once the monies are received to start putting things in place, and we're just trying to maintain that. We'll get that information and any additional questions we can answer next month as well.
Well, Aubrey brought up safety as an additional criteria for streetscapes, which I think is a great idea. Did you have any additional criteria you'd like to recommend for resurfacing?
You know, at this point, other than changing possibly some of the weights that, depending on how the board may feel, I mean, we do put a strong weight on both the condition and the amount of traffic, just trying to get the most impact, obviously, for the roads that are traveled the heaviest. I don't have any additional criteria today. Let me think through that. We really feel like the bond prioritization was a quantum leap from what we did before. The fact that the bond was integrated with Plan OKC criteria, additional criteria came into that list, most helpful, totally coordinated now. It worked really well. Other than just making sure that we look at the right list of projects to resort, and should there maybe be a change in the weighting, we think the criteria are good.
One other thought I had on it was if there are traffic flows that the city would like to see, basically encourage, I guess, transportation to use, and if resurfacing could help foster that. Is that something that the city thinks about and wishes more people would use this street versus another? Or?
You know, so I know after the meeting in January, we talked briefly about that. I hadn't thought through that. I mean, clearly, I guess if we had two very bad streets that were, say, parallel, and one street was improved and the other wasn't, we probably would generally see a move to traffic to the better street, being a smoother street and such. I don't know that we've not looked at that before, but that definitely could be something that we could look at. I think from a transportation planning perspective, when we look at corridors and commuter routes and things of that sort, we have some well-identified commuter routes, just based on the fact that they either have signalization or don't, that they're promoted because of their capacity, a 4-lane versus a 2-lane or not. We could look into that further and see that if we get down to where maybe we have two projects that are nearly tied, or two that are at the top of the list, should we do one over the other based on improved traffic? We could probably do that. I don't know that we have a measure. I don't know that we have a measure or we have a list of streets that we're wanting to enhance more traffic on at this time. I think what we find, if we just continue this conversation, what we find is with the amount of construction that sometimes occurs and what the amount of construction that this will include in Oklahoma City when we're talking about miles and miles and miles of resurfacing, is there's going to be temporary detours and things just because a road like Classen is temporarily being milled and resurfaced. People reroute knowing that that's going to be inconvenient for a month, but then once those streets open, we generally see the same traffic return. We do note that as kind of a general process, but we don't have any other way to really track traffic that way. We don't take counts more than about once a year. Okay. Any other questions? You're very welcome.
I move that Jason I would nominate him
vice chair.
Second?
Aye.
Next item would be comments from the board, staff, citizens. From the board, I'd like to welcome Michael Taylor from Ward 1. Appreciate you being here. You missed all the excitement from the workshop, but you've had some experience in this area. Could you tell us a little about yourself, please, sir?
Well, sure. Michael Taylor. I live in Ward 1, and I'm currently the road superintendent for Oklahoma County District 2, and hopefully some of that knowledge will be able to help with any concerns or outside of potholes. I hope somebody else has that covered. But no, my family and I live in Oklahoma City, and just honored to be selected to be on this board.
Welcome. Thank you. Any other comments from board members? All right. Any other comments from staff? All right. Any comments from citizens? Very good. Well, appreciate everyone being here, and we have a lot of obligation, I think, to the citizens, and I think we have a lot of great information that we can gain and move forward. Thank everyone for their time, and be safe. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.